A small bird suddenly speaks up and tells Kina Witchwood something that makes her blood run cold. The bird warns her that before this current year comes to an end, she will surely meet a most terrible and horrendous execution. Kina stares at the bird in complete shock and asks what it means by such frightening words. She thinks quietly to herself that she had been so incredibly excited and thrilled to catch a thrush in her trap because their prophecies are widely said to always come true without fail. But now this dark and ominous prophecy is what she receives from the creature. The bird suddenly yells out the terrifying word execution with great force and volume. As Kina processes these disturbing words, she thinks deeply to herself that the cold snare of death now hangs heavily around her delicate neck like a noose. She knows well that both absolute truth and complete deceit are carefully concealed and hidden in the twin faces of the ancient god Janus. If she fails to choose the correct truth, she will surely meet a death most wretched and terrible. Kina desperately asks what in the entire world the bird is trying to say to her. The mysterious bird then tells her that she will definitely meet 3 important men of destiny during her remaining time. One man she absolutely cannot refuse no matter how hard she tries. One man she cannot persuade or convince despite her best efforts. And one special man to whom she will solemnly vow her entire life and soul. Kina thinks nervously to herself about vowing her life to someone. Could this possibly mean her future husband that she has not yet met? Does this strange prophecy mean that she is going to get married and then executed within this same year? It is already the month of July, which barely leaves her 6 short months to live. She could not possibly meet 3 different men and get married in such a terribly short amount of time. Kina stays completely silent and carefully puts down the small bird with gentle hands. Kina tells herself that she had been looking forward to hearing a real and genuine prophecy from the thrush, but she supposes this particular one must be a complete quack and fraud. The bird becomes absolutely flabbergasted and shocked, and it warns her again that she will indeed meet an execution most horrendous and painful. Kina thinks calmly to herself to pay the dark prophecy no mind at all. She reminds herself that she never truly believed in prophecies anyway throughout her entire life. Although the prophecy might be true or completely false, it certainly was not a pleasant or comforting thing to hear on this day. But all she really has to do is stay far away from all men for the rest of this year and she will be completely set and safe. That should definitely be a piece of cake for someone like her. In a foreboding and isolated place like the remote Mount Walpurgis where she lives alone, she is not likely to meet anyone at all, let alone a romantic interest or potential husband. Kina confidently tells herself that she will be perfectly safe as long as she does not leave this mountain sanctuary. But Kina suddenly gets cut off mid-thought as she spots something unusual in the distance. She becomes completely flabbergasted and shocked by what she sees. It is actually a man standing there in her territory. She thinks frantically to herself about how this is even possible in such a remote location. She sadly realizes that thrushes are always right after all, just as the legends say. And what makes it worse is that he is quite handsome too, which complicates things. She notices that he appears to have hurt his ankle somehow. Still, she knows she absolutely cannot help him in any way. She cannot and will not follow the dangerous prophecy that was given to her. The unknown man calls out to her and addresses her as the person passing by nearby. He politely asks if she would mind helping him with his current predicament. Kina thinks to herself that his voice sounds so incredibly alluring and attractive. She can feel her heart being pulled strongly towards the sound of it against her better judgment. The mysterious man steps closer towards her while Kina responds that yes, of course she will help him. She suddenly freezes in place and gasps loudly as she thinks to herself about when exactly he managed to get so close to her. Kina looks down at his feet and asks if he has twisted his ankle badly. The man responds that no, he is not actually hurt at all. Kina asks for his pardon because she is confused. He is not hurt in any way? The man smirks with amusement and explains that he was simply acting like he was injured and in pain. He tells her that it seemed like the only effective way to get her to come closer to him willingly. He admits that it is a common trick that people use to lure their prey into range. Kina thinks frantically to herself about what he just said. Did he really just call her his prey? She wonders exactly what kind of dangerous man this person might be. Kina asks him directly why he would do all of that elaborate acting just to get her to come closer to him. The man explains that he is currently looking for someone specific that lives here on the remote Mount Walpurgis. He is searching for a water witch who goes by the name of Kina Witchwood. Kina becomes startled and shocked as she thinks to herself about how this stranger could possibly know her full name. The man asks her politely if she would happen to know this person he seeks. Kina thinks nervously to herself that this situation is definitely a death flag and bad omen. Kina quickly turns around and tells him that the name does not ring any bell for her at all. The man suddenly grabs her hand tightly and yanks her back towards him forcefully. He tells her that if he has to wander these accursed and dark woods for even one more hour, he just might completely lose his cool and patience. So he asks her to please just guide him to where this Kina Witchwood person lives on the mountain. Kina asks him why exactly he is looking for this particular person anyway. The man responds that it is a very personal matter that he cannot discuss. He squeezes her arm tightly and Kina thinks to herself that it really does not look like he is going to give up his search easily. Kina finally decides to tell him that he can tell her all about this personal matter of his, because she is actually Kina Witchwood herself. The scene then cuts to both of them sitting together and having tea in her small cabin. Kina tells him that whatever important matter brought him all the way up this dangerous mountain must be truly important, so she asks what exactly it is. The man responds that he should allow himself to begin with a proper introduction of himself. His full name is Yara Keith, and he would like to ask the Water Witch, who is an expert in healing arts, for a medical examination. Kina asks if the examination is for himself personally. Keith confirms that yes, it is for him. Kina tells him that he does not appear to be ill or sick, but she will give him a quick examination anyway just to be thorough. She asks if he could please unbutton his shirt for the examination. Kina uses her magical abilities to prepare, and the man asks her why she washes her hands even for simple examinations like this one. Kina explains that it is a kind of ritual that she always performs. It is to ensure that she approaches every single patient with a pure heart that is free of bias and prejudice. It was something that her mother, who is also a skilled witch doctor, considered to be important above all other things. Kina steps closer and tells him that she will now begin the examination process. She suddenly freezes in place and thinks that it is like she is looking at a perfect sculpture that someone has dressed up in real clothes. She reaches out and touches him gently, and Keith asks what exactly she is doing to him. Kina exclaims about such incredible suppleness and perfection. She tells him that this is truly the perfect body. It is enough to make her want to keep it as a specimen of perfect health and vitality. She admits that she might even fall in love with such perfection, and she wishes that this perfect body were hers. Kina quickly corrects herself and says that she did not mean him as a person, she meant his physical body. Keith chuckles with amusement and asks what the difference really is between the two things. Kina asks for his forgiveness and explains that she has never seen such a healthy and perfect body before in her entire career. She admits that she lost herself for a moment due to the shock. She grabs his hand gently and tells him that he must have fasted recently, maybe for about 4 days or so. She can also tell from looking at his eyes that he has not gotten enough sleep lately. She also detects clear signs of a migraine headache. It looks to her like it might be an acute symptom of stress and tension. Keith stares at her with amazement and tells her that she is incredibly skilled at this type of examination. Kina responds that the body never lies to those who know how to read it, so she asks if he has passed his test successfully. Keith asks what she means by his test exactly. Kina explains that he asked her to examine him despite not being sick or ill. That means he wanted to see for himself how good she was as a doctor and healer. She asks if she is right about this assumption. The man admits that she is also incredibly perceptive and observant. He stands up from his seat and confirms that she is absolutely right about everything. His real goal in coming here today, Miss Witchwood, was to see if she is good and qualified for a particular job he has in mind. Kina asks him what kind of job he is referring to exactly. Keith smirks mysteriously and whispers the shocking words about poisoning the emperor of the land. Kina becomes shocked and avoids eye contact while telling him that she is going to pretend she did not hear those dangerous words at all. Keith tells her that he regrets to inform her that she already has heard them clearly. Kina starts trembling with fear, and Keith asks if she is feeling cold suddenly. He notices that she is suddenly quivering and shaking. Kina screams in shock that yes, she is indeed cold. In fact, her very soul has frozen over with terror. She knows that getting caught even having a conversation like this could easily mean the death penalty for both of them. She gives him a firm answer of no, and that is a definite refusal of whatever he is asking. Keith chuckles with amusement and tells her that he was only joking about the poisoning part. Kina clenches her fist tightly and thinks angrily to herself about what kind of terrible joke that was to make. Keith explains that he is actually here to ask her to become His Majesty's personal physician and healer. The emperor has been living in constant fear for the past 2 years of his life. He believes strongly that someone is actively trying to poison him with deadly substances. Kina asks about someone trying to poison him, so that is why he has come to a witch doctor. He needs someone who is well versed in herbs and poisons. Keith confirms that she is absolutely right about his reasoning. His existing physician recently resigned due to unavoidable circumstances that could not be helped. Kina asks herself about these unavoidable circumstances with suspicion. Could it possibly be that they were executed because they could not cure the emperor properly? Kina gets chills running down her spine, and Keith scoffs and tells her that no, the physician resigned due to a personal illness. There was a long discussion about who should take her place, and Lady Chilton specifically recommended her for the position. Kina asks about Lady Chilton with curiosity. Keith explains that she is the emperor's beloved mistress and companion. He tells Kina that Lady Chilton says she met her 3 years ago in a hot spring at the foot of this very mountain. Kina thinks to herself that she does recall performing an examination on someone she met in a hot spring once upon a time. Could that person have been the famous Lady Chilton? She is widely said to possess the incredible beauty of a goddess from heaven, and there are rumors spreading around that she captivated even the very soul of the powerful emperor himself. But the concerning thing is that she gave that woman a single dose of love potion during their meeting. Could Lady Chilton have used that magical potion on the emperor himself? Kina bites her finger nervously and thinks to herself that if she did exactly that, it alone could get her executed for treason. She glances nervously at Keith, and Keith tilts his head with curiosity. Kina thinks firmly to herself that she will definitely just keep that dangerous secret to herself forever. Kina tells him that, like she said before, she respectfully declines his generous offer. It is not as if she is actually qualified to be the emperor's personal physician anyway. Keith thinks to himself as Kina continues to explain that she is just a quiet countryside witch, and a fancy position like that definitely does not suit someone like her at all. Keith nods his head and says that he understands her position completely. Kina thinks to herself that this is it. She had thought that he would drag her along no matter what she said to refuse. This is perfect because she has to avoid her terrible fate no matter what happens. She will surely be executed if she becomes the emperor's physician as the prophecy warned. Keith puts on his robe and prepares to leave, and Kina tells him that she feels bad that he came all this way for absolutely nothing. Keith tells her not to worry about it at all because it was not a wasted trip. He grabs the door handle and tells her that if she is done talking and making her decision, she should pack her things immediately. He informs her that they are leaving right away without delay. Kina stares at him in shock and asks what he means by that. Keith tells her that he believes he made himself perfectly clear about the situation. His Majesty's beloved mistress recommended her specifically for this position. Did she not do exactly that? Keith steps closer and explains that in other words, the Emperor himself has directly commanded that he bring him Kina Witchwood without fail. Kina scrambles backwards and tells him to wait just a moment before doing anything. Keith opens a magical portal with his powers, and Kina thinks to herself that it is indeed a quick travel portal. Keith extends his hand towards her and asks if Miss Kina Witchwood is ready to go to the imperial capital with him right now. Inside the comfortable carriage, Kina looks around in complete amazement and exclaims with wonder about the incredible sights before her eyes. She tells herself that it is the imperial capital after all, so such grandeur should be expected. She thinks quietly to herself that it feels like she has been transported into a completely different world entirely. Everyone around her looks so busy and full of vibrant energy, but she does not see any cargo wagons moving through the streets. She had thought that she would see a lot of active trade and commerce in the capital city. Keith notices her confusion and explains to her that the cargo wagons are only allowed to travel from evening until dawn breaks. There would be complete chaos and disorder if they were allowed in the busy streets during the day when people are active. The city is already crowded and packed as it currently is. Kina's eyes light up with understanding, and she says to herself that she can see how that kind of traffic congestion would indeed be very bad for public safety and order. She notices that one particular building looks especially elegant and beautiful. It must surely be the famous imperial palace that she has heard so much about. An emperor that rules over such a vast and prosperous empire with such magnificent buildings, she wonders deeply what kind of man he could possibly be as a person. The scene then cuts to inside the palace where the emperor is speaking about the situation. The emperor asks if she is truly to be his new personal physician and healer. Kina trembles with nervousness and thinks anxiously to herself that yes, she supposes that is exactly what is happening. The emperor lets out a long sigh and asks if she is not a bit too young for such an important position. He wonders aloud why Chilton would recommend such a young child for this crucial role. Keith steps forward respectfully and tells His Majesty that he can personally assure him that he has thoroughly confirmed that she is indeed a capable doctor with a very commendable and professional attitude towards all of her patients. The Emperor asks if that is really so and true. Keith continues and says that furthermore, she is a skilled water witch, which means that she will be very familiar with herbs and natural remedies. She will definitely be a most trustworthy physician for His Majesty's needs. The Emperor slowly gets up from his throne and says that if Keith insists so strongly, he supposes he has no other choice in the matter. Kina thinks nervously to herself that the Emperor seems to respect Lord Keith quite a bit. That must mean that Keith holds a very important and influential position in the court. But more importantly than that, Kina takes a careful glance at the powerful Emperor, and he glares back at her with cold eyes. He then turns around dismissively, and Kina thinks worriedly to herself that she does not think His Majesty actually likes her at all. At this terrible rate, even the slightest mistake on her part could mean instant execution for her crimes. The scene then cuts to the Emperor's private office where Keith observes the Emperor carefully. Keith tells him that he looks quite fatigued and tired, addressing him as my lord. The Emperor responds that he has Halcyon to thank for that exhaustion as usual. After all, Halcyon did poison his drink during the recent excursion and outing. Kina thinks to herself about this Halcyon person with concern. If he is talking about Duke Halcyon, that would be the Emperor's own half-brother by blood. Come to think of it more carefully, there was a time in the past when all everyone talked about was the complex relationship between the Emperor and the Duke. Halcyon was originally in line to become the next Emperor according to succession laws, but the current Emperor's ambitious mother sent Halcyon, who was the child of a former wife, to the cold north in order to place her own biological son on the throne instead. It has not been that long since Duke Halcyon has returned to the capital city, and he was only allowed to return after his mother finally died. It is only completely natural that he would harbor a deep grudge against the Emperor who took his rightful place. Does that unfortunate history make him a prime suspect for the Emperor's attempted assassination? The Emperor continues speaking and says that Halcyon should never have been allowed to return to the palace at all. He declares that Halcyon should have been left to freeze to death in the harsh north. Considering the sordid and complicated start of affairs between them, what good will this young witch possibly do for him in this situation? Kina flinches at his harsh words and addresses him respectfully as Your Majesty. If it would please him, she would very much like to take his pulse and examine him properly. Doing so will allow her to begin taking full responsibility for his well-being immediately and without delay. The Emperor thinks silently to himself for a moment, but then tells her that very well, they should see what she can actually do for him. Kina carefully uses her water magic power to prepare and thinks anxiously to herself that she is so incredibly nervous that her heart is about to pop out of her chest completely. She knows she cannot let her heart beat faster than her patient's heart rate during the examination. She takes a glance at the Emperor and thinks to herself about the immense pressure she feels in this situation. She will probably suffocate from stress before she even gets executed for any crimes. Kina forces herself to calm down and tells herself firmly that she will be perfectly fine if she just does what she always does during examinations. Kina steps forward confidently and tells the Emperor that she will now begin his thorough examination, addressing him as Your Majesty with proper respect. Kina gently touches his back and presses it carefully while instructing him to take a deep breath and let it out slowly. She guides him by saying that is exactly right, and to continue with slow, deep breaths for the examination. Kina thinks fondly to herself that her mother always used to say something important about her work. Her mother would tell her that Kina becomes a completely different person when she examines patients, even her voice changes dramatically. When Kina would ask how so, her mother would smile warmly and explain that she becomes exceptionally kind and caring. It is enough for even the most ill-tempered and difficult patients to want to place their complete trust in her healing abilities. The Emperor gasps suddenly during the examination and then looks down with concern. Kina instructs him politely to please follow her finger with his eyes carefully. The Emperor nods obediently, and Kina tells him that she will do this for exactly 3 seconds. The butler becomes startled by what he observes while Keith just stares quietly at the proceedings. Kina announces that the examination is now complete and finished, but she asks with concern how long his arms have been in that particular condition. The Emperor freezes in place as the butler asks about his arm with alarm. The butler exclaims that His Majesty's rash has returned again. He demands to know why the Emperor did not say anything about this important symptom. The butler continues speaking frantically and says that a rash is not actually a serious disease in itself. He explains that it is caused by stress and tension, but he worries about what people would say if they knew about this weakness. The Emperor responds that they would surely accuse him of being feeble-minded and weak, and he clenches his fist tightly as he continues by saying that he can already hear Halcyon snickering and laughing at his condition now. Keith addresses the Emperor respectfully and asks if these symptoms appeared after the recent quarrel and argument with the Duke. The Emperor looks away uncomfortably while saying absolutely nothing in response. Kina thinks to herself that this must definitely be the root of the problem. The Emperor's half-brother appears to be the source of all his various illnesses and stress. And that is also probably why he refuses to show Halcyon any sign of weakness or vulnerability. If that is indeed the case, then Kina has an idea. Kina tells them that she prefers caring for patients alone and in private, so she would like to perform her examinations one-on-one from now on without any observers. The butler responds nervously and asks about this one-on-one arrangement with concern. Kina confirms that yes, that is exactly what she means, and if His Majesty will allow it and grant permission, she would also like to apply the Sacred Water Witch's code to their relationship. This means that the state of the Emperor's health would be a secret known only to her and no one else. The butler becomes shocked and declares that this is absolutely out of the question. He yells frantically that if people remain unaware of His Majesty's true condition and something goes terribly wrong, who will be held responsible? Kina responds that she would have to abide by the sacred code no matter what happens, and she reminds them that a water witch would never break the code under any circumstances. Keith scoffs at this declaration, and Kina continues by saying that there is one more thing. She asks them to please share with her His Majesty's complete daily menu and food schedule. She has noticed during her examination that he has very poor digestion and stomach problems. At the very least, he should only eat the breakfasts that she personally approves of and prepares. The Emperor nervously laughs and asks if she is really being serious about this. Kina says that to summarize her requirements clearly, she will be working alone without supervision. She will not be required to disclose His Majesty's condition to anyone else. She will be informed of his daily menu and eating schedule, and she must have complete control over his breakfasts each morning. If he can agree to these 3 specific conditions, she will devote her all to His Majesty's health and recovery. Kina's heart starts beating rapidly and she thinks nervously to herself that she has finally done it and spoken her mind. He would not execute her on her very first day of service, so the worst thing he can possibly do is kick her out of the palace. The Emperor considers her words carefully and then says that alright, they can have it her way if that is what she truly wants. Kina asks for his pardon because she is not sure what is happening. The Emperor explains that he said they will do exactly as she says and follow her conditions. He tells her that he has never had a physician quite like her before, and he finds that he actually likes her approach. He also commends how she is willing to take full responsibility for his well-being and health. But he warns her that her conditions come with a serious price attached. With an evil and threatening look, the Emperor tells her to listen very closely, Kina Witchwood. If in spite of all the exceptions he makes for her and all the special treatment he gives her, he is still poisoned by his enemies, she will be held completely responsible for his death. And she will be executed by hanging until she is dead. Keith and Kina walk out of the office together after this meeting, and Keith takes a glance at her and says that there is an old saying in the East about such situations. He tells her about pulling the noose around her own neck. Kina asks while sobbing what he means by that saying. Keith explains that it is used to describe someone who falls into their own trap through their own actions. He thinks that saying describes her perfectly in this situation. Kina looks at him and thinks to herself that he is actually enjoying this dangerous predicament she has gotten herself into. Kina sighs deeply and says that she should have just kept her mouth shut during the meeting. What was she thinking when she was pretending to be so eager and confident? Well, there is no point in crying over spilled milk now that it is done. If she is going to prevent the terrible prophecy from coming true, she might as well just try her very best to curry favor with His Majesty and win his approval. She declares to herself that she is a trustworthy water witch named Kina Witchwood, and she is at His Majesty's complete service. Surely she will not get executed if she manages to get the Emperor to like her and trust her abilities. Exile from the kingdom is probably the worst thing that could possibly happen to her if she succeeds. Kina clenches her fist with determination and says that alright, she is going to change her fate completely. There will be no execution for her if she can help it. Keith asks if she is done making her internal resolution and pep talk. Kina freezes in place and asks what he means by that question. She thinks to herself with shock about whether he just read her mind somehow. Keith tilts his head curiously at her reaction. Keith asks her directly if she is finished making her internal resolution and decision. Kina thinks worriedly to herself about whether he just read her mind somehow. Kina asks him with confusion how he could possibly know that she made a resolution in her thoughts. She demands to know if he can actually read people's minds like some kind of magic. Keith confirms that he can indeed do exactly that. But he explains that he can only pick up a few small tidbits of the strongest and most intense thoughts that people have. What he managed to pick up from her racing mind was something along the lines of her desperately not wanting to be executed, and her pleading for no execution to happen. Kina becomes embarrassed and flustered as she thinks to herself that he was actually being serious about his abilities. Keith asks her if it is really such a great honor to become the Emperor's personal physician, so is execution truly the only thing she can think about right now in this moment? Kina gets faltered and nervous as she says that it is because she thinks to herself that she supposes there is no point in hiding her thoughts if he can read her mind anyway. Kina decides to explain that a thrush bird told her a very specific prophecy. The bird said that her chance of being executed this year is exactly 98.9%. Keith thinks to himself about this prophecy with some skepticism. He tells himself that he would not take such a thing too seriously if he were in her position. Keith tells her that the moment she begins to truly believe a prophecy is when the lines of fate are drawn accordingly and become real. Kina insists that a thrush's prophecy always comes true without fail. Keith reaches out and holds her hand gently while saying that in most cases, yes, that might be true, but it should not matter at all in her particular case and situation. He reveals that an archpriest who can nullify curses and prophecies stands right by her side at this very moment. Kina asks with shock what he means by that statement. She thinks frantically to herself about an archpriest being by her side. It could not possibly be true. She realizes with growing amazement that Lord Yerrick Keith is actually an archpriest. Now that she thinks about it more carefully, archpriests are indeed capable of using powerful psychic magic. Mind reading is definitely their specialty and area of expertise. That also explains perfectly why the Emperor seemed to respect whatever Lord Yerrick said during their meeting. It is the only position in the entire empire that even the Emperor himself must show reverence and respect to. In other words, Archpriest Yerrick is her only ticket out of execution and certain death. Kina grabs his hand eagerly and tells Keith that they should definitely be good friends from now on. Keith stares at her with amusement and starts laughing heartily at her sudden change in attitude. Keith says with fondness that, dear me, just what is he going to do with this adorable young lady who is so transparent? Kina thinks to herself that he startled her with his laughter. But now that she can see him up close like this for the first time, his eyes seem to sparkle like precious gems in the light. She finds herself wishing that she could touch him around his eyes or maybe even his lips. Kina gets flustered and thinks to herself to wait just a minute. What is she thinking about right now? Keith chuckles with amusement and tells her that very well, she may touch him if that is what she desires. He admits that he has also never met anyone as enjoyable to be with as her in all his years. He addresses her formally as Miss Kina Witchwood. Kina thinks to herself with surprise about his claim that he has never met anyone like her before. And he just said that he enjoys being with her, did he not? Keith changes the subject and asks Miss Witchwood who she will go to greet first in the palace. Should it be the Empress or Lady Chilton? Kina responds that it is only proper and appropriate that she meet the Empress first according to palace protocol. Keith agrees that very well, that is the correct choice. But now that they are friends, he should warn her about something important. His Majesty also suspects the Empress of being an accomplice in the plot to assassinate him. Duke Halcyon sighs deeply and says that he really should have the law changed in this empire. He does not see why the archpriest should always be allowed immediate audience with anyone he chooses. Keith responds that he sees very little reason for such concern if the Duke has nothing to hide from anyone. But he points out that the Emperor's own brother having an affair with the Empress is concerning to say the least. Kina thinks to herself with shock about what he just said so casually. An affair? Between the Empress and Duke Halcyon? Is it really okay to say something like that so openly in public? But something feels distinctly off about those two people to her. They do not quite look like a real couple despite being so physically close to each other in the room. The Duke asks with disdain if this young woman is the Emperor's new physician that he has heard about. Keith confirms that she is indeed correct about that. The Duke scoffs and says that so now the Emperor will give imperial positions even to witches from the mountains. He is sure that Keith went to greet Lady Chilton first before coming here. He asks why they would even bother coming to see the Empress at all. Keith responds that he is not sure what the Duke means by that accusation, addressing him as Your Highness. He explains that they came to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Empress first as is proper protocol. The Empress scoffs and laughs bitterly while saying that is that really so? She finds it very interesting that he would come to see her first. After all, it is Lady Chilton that has the entire palace in the palm of her hand, and it is thanks to her that Keith is even here in the first place. Either he is incredibly naive or very cunning in his approach. Kina squeezes her hand nervously and tells the Empress that not at all, Your Majesty, it is only right that after meeting the Emperor, she should come to pay her respects to the Empress next. After all, she is the First Lady of the Delpha's Empire and deserves that honor. Complete silence erupts in the room after her words. Halcyon finally says that they have had enough of this pointless flattery and tells them to leave his presence immediately. Kina agrees and says yes, and the maid quickly opens the door for them to exit. Halcyon tells her that she has paid her respects as required, so she should go to Lady Chilton now. The Empress adds that she can squander the rest of the afternoon conversing with Lady Chilton if she wishes, and she will have gained absolutely nothing from the experience. Kina sighs deeply as she feels completely drained from the encounter. She tells herself that she can feel her lifespan shortening with every passing moment in this dangerous palace. Kina calls out to Keith and says that he mentioned that her predecessor resigned due to an illness. Does he happen to know what kind of illness it was exactly? Keith explains that it was an unknown disorder of the stomach that baffled all the doctors. The previous physician lost all her hair, and she looked like the very countenance of death itself, so they let her go from her position. The predecessor had said her goodbye by declaring that she was leaving behind all the burdens of this life to go and seek her happiness elsewhere. Kina bites her finger nervously as she thinks to herself that it was definitely caused by stress and nothing else. But now that she has met Duke Halcyon in person, she can understand perfectly why the Emperor is so suspicious of him. He is an imposing man who seems to embody the very words ambition and revenge like a vicious lion ready to strike. But she wonders why someone like that would keep agitating the Emperor by repeatedly attempting to poison him. If he truly wanted to take the throne from his brother, he could simply assassinate him when the right moment presents itself instead. Keith notices her distraction and asks if Miss Witchwood is all right. She appears to be lost deep in her thoughts about something troubling. Kina flinches at being caught and Keith tells her that it is time to go see Lady Chilton now. Kina thinks to herself that he is right. She has one more important person to meet today. The person who got her into this entire mess in the first place. Keith and Kina walk together through the palace corridors while the crowd of people looks at them with curiosity and interest. She takes a glance around and thinks to herself that she has heard that Lady Chilton has taken over much of the imperial palace with her influence. But her grounds and area really are much more lively and vibrant than the Empress's quarters were. Whispers can be heard all around them as people talk to each other and ask questions. They wonder if she could be the witch doctor from Mount Valpurgis that they have heard about. She could not possibly be the one, she looks much too young for such an important position. But she was personally recommended by Lady Chilton herself. Surely she must be some kind of genius to receive such an honor. But still, how could they let a witch into the palace? One of the people quickly shushes the others to be quiet. Kina sighs heavily and thinks to herself about whether they do not know that she can hear every word they are saying about her. A palace worker steps forward and says that they thank the Archpriest Yerrick for gracing the Swan Palace with his presence today. He informs them that Lady Chilton awaits them inside her chambers. Kina walks into the room and is immediately surprised by what she sees in this place. She thinks to herself that this place is like a beautiful giant glass greenhouse filled with plants. The sight is absolutely stunning to behold. Chilton calls out warmly to Kina and holds her hand while asking how she has been doing recently. She wants to know if the trip to the capital was taxing or difficult for her. Kina responds that not at all, my lady, because Lord Yerrick opened a magical portal for them to travel through easily. Yerrick bows down respectfully, and Chilton smiles while saying that is very good to hear indeed. She suggests that they should sit down and be comfortable. The scene then cuts to all of them sitting together and having tea in the beautiful greenhouse. Chilton tells them that Miss Witchwood here may be quite young, but she is remarkably skilled at her craft. She especially has a wonderful way of putting her patients at ease and making them comfortable. Chilton explains that people will find themselves with their guard down and smiling before they even know what is happening. She knows that Kina will be an indispensable asset to His Majesty's health and well-being. This is especially true during these particularly difficult times that the Empire is facing. Chilton clenches her fist with emotion, and Kina thinks to herself that it seems like Lady Chilton is genuinely worried about the Emperor's condition and safety. She wonders if Chilton was looking for a doctor who puts patients at ease rather than just a skilled one. Chilton continues speaking and says that now people are going to talk and gossip about the situation, but Kina should not pay them any mind at all. Everything will be perfectly fine if she comes to the Swan Palace often to visit. She tells Kina that she hopes that she will come to depend on her for support and guidance. Chilton extends her hand out towards Kina in a gesture of friendship and alliance. Kina freezes completely as she thinks to herself that if she takes this offered hand, she will officially be making enemies with the Empress and her faction. Kina tells Chilton that she truly appreciates the concern and kindness, however she would like to do the best she can by herself without taking sides. Chilton freezes at this unexpected response, and Kina tries to play it off diplomatically by saying that after all, Lady Chilton is the one who recommended her for this position, my lady. She would not want to put Chilton in an awkward position with the other factions in the palace. Chilton becomes flabbergasted by this refusal but covers it up by saying of course she understands. She chuckles and says that kind of independent spirit is precisely what she likes about Kina, Miss Witchwood. Kina thinks to herself that she did come here thanks to Lady Chilton's recommendation, but she has to draw the line here for her own safety. Her main duty is to be the Emperor's personal physician, not to get involved in palace politics. Chilton claps her hands together and says that this reminds her of something important. She mentions that she understands that Kina went to pay her respects to the Empress first before coming here. Chilton tilts her head with curiosity and asks if that decision was Archpriest Yerrick's idea. Chilton continues speaking and says that she understands that Kina went to pay her respects to the Empress first before coming here. She asks directly if that decision was Archpriest Yerrick's idea and suggestion. Kina freezes completely in place, and Keith becomes startled by the direct question, so Kina quickly cuts him off by explaining that it was actually her own idea, my lady. She tells Chilton that she was the one who told the Archpriest that she wished to greet the Empress first according to proper protocol. Chilton responds with understanding and says, very good then. She agrees that it is only proper and appropriate to do so. Although she must admit honestly that she is a little disappointed by this choice. But she supposes that is what she gets for having unrealistic expectations about loyalty. Chilton smiles diplomatically and says that Kina should just know that she has been looking forward to seeing her that much, addressing her warmly as Kina. Kina flinches at the intensity of Chilton's words and nervously laughs while saying that she understands completely. Keith gets up from his seat and says that he is sorry to interrupt their conversation, but he must be going now to attend to other duties. Chilton asks with surprise if he is leaving already so soon. Keith explains that he must show Miss Witchwood to her new clinic and get her settled in properly. Chilton looks directly at Kina and says what a shame that their visit must be cut short. She asks Kina to promise her that she will come back to visit again soon because they have much catching up to do together. She emphasizes that it should be just the two of them next time for a private conversation. The narrative then shifts with a storytelling tone that once upon a time, in a small cabin deep on Mount Walpurgis, there lived a witch named Kina Witchwood. Kina had lived there peacefully, surrounded by lovely animals and the beauty of nature. Until one fateful day, everything changed completely and forever. Thunder rumbles ominously in the distance, and Kina looks back at the hanging rope in her cabin while thinking sadly to herself about why everything had to change so dramatically. Kina sighs deeply and addresses Keith formally as Your Eminence. She asks him exactly when His Majesty took Lady Chilton as his official mistress. Keith responds that it was exactly 3 years ago at the end of July. Kina thinks to herself with growing alarm that the end of July is exactly when she gave Chilton the love potion during their meeting. That definitely settles the matter once and for all. Lady Chilton definitely used the magical potion on the Emperor to win his affections. Kina holds her head in her hands and sighs heavily with guilt and worry. Keith notices her distress and asks her about it, saying that she looks like she has a lot of troubling things on her mind right now. Kina asks him desperately what she should do about this situation, Lord Yerrick. The problem is Lady Chilton and what she has done. How could she ever have been so foolish to help her? Keith responds nervously by asking if she should not tell him that she is in love with Lady Chilton herself. Kina jolts in complete shock and says no, absolutely not. She demands to know what he is saying and thinking. Kina explains that when she met Lady Chilton all those years ago at the hot spring, she concocted a powerful love potion for her at her request. And she is pretty sure that Lady Chilton then used that potion for her own purposes. Keith finishes her thought by asking if she used it on the Emperor to make him fall in love. Kina nods while sobbing with guilt and regret. Keith tells her calmly that he already knew that she had been worried about that exact possibility. She has been worried about it since they were back on Mount Walpurgis. She has been thinking constantly about what would happen if Lady Chilton used the love potion on the Emperor. Is that not right? Kina thinks to herself with surprise that he already knew about her fears and concerns all along. Kina squeezes her arm nervously and asks if he is going to tell His Majesty about the potion and her involvement. Keith responds that no, he will not reveal this information. He explains that while an archpriest may be able to read minds with his magical abilities, he cannot relay those private thoughts to anyone besides the person who originally thought them. Keith smiles reassuringly and says that if he were to break this sacred rule, he would be executed immediately for his betrayal. But more importantly than that, he points out that their love may have begun with a magical potion, but Lady Chilton has been the only object of His Majesty's love and affection for the last 3 years. Does Kina not think that Lady Chilton's own natural charm has been at work during all this time? Kina responds with enthusiasm that absolutely, Lady Chilton is a natural-born goddess with incredible beauty and charm. Keith agrees but says that the potion is still a serious problem nonetheless that could cause trouble. So he asks Kina to please never make Lady Chilton another love potion ever again. Kina promises that he has her word and she will never do such a thing again. Keith smiles with satisfaction, and the scene cuts to him announcing that they have arrived at their destination. He tells her that this building will be her personal clinic for treating the Emperor. The door opens to reveal a room that is very bright and sparkly inside. Keith explains that since she said she did not need an assistant to help her, he has prepared one attendant and one maid for her instead. He asks what she thinks of the arrangements. Kina's eyes light up with pure joy and excitement as she exclaims with wonder about how amazing it looks. She tells him that it is so cozy and comfortable, and she absolutely loves everything about it. Keith says that he is very glad she approves of the setup. He tells her that she should get some rest today and recover from all the excitement. Her first official day as the Emperor's personal physician begins tomorrow morning. He explains that she will be working with a dedicated manager from now on instead of working directly with him. Kina quickly looks back at him with concern and thinks to herself about having a dedicated manager instead of Lord Yerrick. She squeezes her arm as she thinks to herself that she supposes an archpriest would indeed be a very busy man with many important duties. She wonders why she had assumed that she would see him every single day going forward. She realizes that she has already started depending on him emotionally in a very short time. Kina bows down respectfully and says that it is all right and she understands completely. She thanks him sincerely for all his help today in getting her settled. Keith responds that it was entirely his pleasure to assist her. He tells her that if she ever needs anything at all, she should come to the Grand Temple anytime and he will help her. The door shuts with a final sound, and Kina holds herself as she thinks sadly to herself that she is truly alone now in this new place. But she supposes that she was completely alone before today anyway, so nothing has really changed. She feels like she has been tossed into a dangerous minefield where one wrong step could be fatal. What a terrible headache this situation has become. But she is genuinely glad that she told Archpriest Yerrick about the love potion and her involvement in the situation. A sudden thought clicks in her mind, and Kina realizes something very important and troubling. She says to herself to wait just a second. Did he not say that he can only read a few small tidbits of people's strongest thoughts? But now she is remembering something strange. She gets a vivid flashback to Keith telling her that he had been worried since they were back at Mount Valpurgis. He had said that she had been thinking constantly about what would happen if Lady Chilton used the love potion on the Emperor, right? Kina gasps with shock and thinks to herself that knowing all of that is definitely not just a few small tidbits of her thoughts. The more she thinks about this strange situation, the stranger and more suspicious it becomes. She wonders why an important archpriest would go into the remote mountains to fetch a simple doctor himself personally. Could this entire situation have been some kind of elaborate test of her character? Was he carefully observing and analyzing what she was thinking while she was speaking with the Emperor during their first meeting? And then again while she was speaking with Lady Chilton in the greenhouse? And then he revealed that he was an archpriest with special powers only after she had met everyone important in the palace. Kina sighs deeply and says to herself that she has a very bad feeling about all of this developing situation. She thinks about the 3 men mentioned in the Thrush's ominous prophecy. The Emperor has to be the one she absolutely cannot refuse no matter what he commands, which means that Archpriest Yerrick must be either the one she cannot persuade despite her best efforts, or the one to whom she will vow her entire life and soul. But she knows that an archpriest has to remain celibate according to religious law, so she could not possibly vow her life to him in marriage. Which leaves only one possibility remaining. He must be the one she cannot persuade when she needs him most. Does that terrible fate mean that he is going to abandon and ditch her when she needs his help the most desperately? The scene then cuts to the Grand Temple where Keith walks through the sacred halls. As he enters, A priest bows down respectfully to show his reverence. Keith approaches a special door and holds it while speaking a magical spell under his breath. The door opens wide to reveal a hidden chamber filled with a lot of gold and precious treasures. He steps carefully into what appears to be a secret laboratory filled with various magical instruments and supplies. Keith picks up a small green bottle from among the many containers while thinking deeply to himself about his next moves. Keith holds the small bottle of glass carefully in his hands and looks back over his shoulder to make sure he is alone. He reaches out and touches a mysterious object, and it immediately starts glowing with a bright red light that fills the chamber. Keith lifts the glowing object with reverence and starts chanting his powerful spell, speaking the ancient words of Max Ion Chia in the sacred spell of resurrection. The next day arrives with new challenges for Kina. She looks around her new workspace and says with disbelief that this place is absolutely unbelievable, what a complete dump it has become. She thinks to herself that regular doctors do not believe in the healing effects of herbs and natural remedies, so she had expected the herb storage room to be a complete mess. She looks around at the office with papers and books scattered everywhere in complete disorder. Kina sighs deeply and says that the office is in the same terrible condition too, but she honestly did not expect it to be quite this bad and chaotic. The first thing she needs to do is start organizing the office properly. She grabs her cleaning brush to begin the work, but suddenly a knock is heard at the door. The sound comes again with someone saying "excuse me" politely. The voice continues and tells Miss Witchwood that she is already awake and working. Kina asks who the person is exactly. The woman responds that she is Goldie, and she will be Kina's dedicated manager moving forward from this day. Kina thinks to herself that this must be the person that Archpriest Yerrick mentioned to her yesterday. Goldie hands over some important documents and explains that she came to deliver some papers for a review. She asks if Kina could take a look at them when she has time. The papers contain the complete list of gifts that have arrived for her from various people. Kina asks with surprise about what gifts she is referring to. The manager explains that they are all sent to congratulate her on becoming His Majesty's personal physician. It is quite an honor. Kina thinks to herself with amazement that all of these papers are just a list of her gifts from well-wishers. Goldie continues and explains that she has arranged the list in careful order of rank and reputation of the senders. That should make it much easier for Kina to decide the proper order in which to respond to each person appropriately. Kina thinks to herself as she looks at the list that it appears Lady Chilton is first on the list, and of course there is no gift from the Empress at all. The manager then says that there is also a separate gift from the Archpriest that is not included in the official list. Kina asks with curiosity what she means by separate, as in not included in the main list. The manager confirms that yes, that is exactly right. She explains that His Eminence never gives personal gifts without a very special reason, so he specifically wanted her to give this particular gift to Kina in complete secret. Kina opens the mysterious package and becomes shocked by what she sees inside. She exclaims with wonder about what a beautiful brooch it appears to be. But suddenly the gem starts twitching and moving strangely. Kina becomes confused by the strange twitching movement, and then a small turtle head pops out from what she thought was a jewel. Kina thinks to herself with realization that it is not actually a brooch at all. It is a living turtle that has been disguised as jewelry. The manager smiles and says that it is indeed a gem turtle, and asks if it is not absolutely adorable. The manager continues and says that though it might not seem like the best gift for a young person like herself, the turtle is actually quite meaningful since a turtle symbolizes longevity and long life. Kina begins to sob with emotion and thinks to herself while addressing Archpriest Yerrick that oh come on, he should not do such thoughtful things for her. She snuggles gently with the small turtle and says that she is going to name the creature Longevity. She tells the turtle that they are both going to live to a good old age together, the turtle and herself. The manager asks if Kina will be looking after His Majesty starting today as planned. Kina confirms that yes, she is going to go see the Emperor as soon as she is finished tidying up the messy office space.